So as we gather this evening, I'll go ahead and get started. I am putting a few messages into the group chat at the bottom of your screen. If you see some messages there, just a reminder about being recorded and to please mute yourself so that we don't have any background feed or noises from our homes, as we have cats and I may even have a child wander in, but we can focus on our presenters. But I would just like to say welcome to you all this evening, and I'm so glad that you have decided to join us this night. And why don't we begin in prayer? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Oh God, we gather together this night to consider our plans for the end of our lives. We know not when our time will come to join you in your heavenly kingdom, but we come to learn how we may best make our wishes known to our family and friends. We pray that the work we do now will be a gift to those who remain here on earth, and we pray to unburden ourselves, knowing we have expressed our wishes to others. Be a part of this sacred and important conversation and help us to have open hearts and minds as we enter into it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Adam's wife, Courtney.
That's right. I'm Courtney Davis Shoemaker. I'm so glad to welcome you all. Again, I'd invite you to mute yourselves, and in just a moment, I am going to bring our two primary speakers to the forefront of our screens. But we're so happy you all are here. And just as someone who has served as the executor of both my parents' estate, I just want to say thank you for all of you thinking about these important conversations, because there was so much that I had to learn on my own, and these are critical. This week we are going to hear from Dr. Jim Bouknight, who is a parishioner at St. Stephen's, as well as an attorney, Liz Fisher. And next week, we are going to hear from a representative from Stir's Funeral Home, and I will also be talking about funeral service planning. And so to introduce our speakers, I just would like to introduce Dr. Jim Bouknight, who will be facilitating tonight's conversation. And Jim has an extensive CV. He graduated magna cum laude from Wofford College with a BA, an MA in economics at Duke University, a PhD in economics from the University of South Carolina, and is an MD from the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. Jim served as the director of the geriatric psychiatry program at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, and he was a psychiatry consultant to the Palmetto Health Hospice Service. Jim has extensive experience dealing with end-of-life issues and death, and we are so grateful to have you here this evening. Jim, thank you for being a part of helping put this program together and helping to facilitate this conversation. I am also going to bring to our screen our attorney, Liz Fisher, who is a native of Folly Beach and continues to live there with her family. She graduated cum laude from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Religious Studies. And then she then graduated from the University of South Carolina Law School and was admitted to the South Carolina Bar that same year. Since graduation, she has practiced alongside her father, Rick, in the area of family law, probate law, personal injury, real estate, and business law. And since 2007, she has predominantly focused her practice on the areas of family law and probate law, with a strong focus on alternative medicine for dispute resolution, including the use of collaborative law, mediation, and arbitration. She is certified in the practice of collaborative law as a mediator, as an arbitrator, and as a guardian ad litem, a role she began pursuing while attending law school. So we are delighted to have you both here this evening. And now, Jim, I am going to turn this conversation over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. I think first I need to explain why you don't have this booklet. When Courtney and I first started talking about this program, we said, we may get 8, 10, 12 participants. Nobody's going to be that interested. So out of 20 of the booklets, we have 41. I put in my third order today. So by next week, we should have everybody with a booklet. So I apologize for that. The booklet is just, it's a wonderful way to record your wishes. It's not essential for you to have it tonight at all. So I'd like to go through just a few slides to talk about some of the issues in end of life or perhaps long-term illness decisions. I don't think anything's going to be startling to you, but I think to organize it and to encourage you to think about it might be helpful. So let me start that. I'm going to try to share my screen. If I'm a little technologically challenged, but let's see. Did that work?
It's coming.
Okay. Everybody see it?
Yes.
Ah, great.
Yes.
Well, what is end of life? I mean, how do we define that? And that, means we have to know when we're going to die. And nobody's shared that with me yet. I've had some people threaten to tell me when I'm going to die, but we don't know. And most of us associate end of life issues with the elderly, with my age group. But when you start to think about it, it might be even more important for younger people to think about that, particularly younger people with children. Who do you want to raise your children if you weren't there? Do you want the government involved in this? Do you want lawyers involved in this? Not to offend Liz, but if you could make your decisions known to everybody, then it would help your children after you were gone. And so young people in their 20s need to be thinking about this. The children, if your desire is for your children to be raised together, if you have more than one child, that's not a guarantee unless you've made provisions for that. So it's very important for all of us to think about that. When you look at end of life decisions, that many of us require assistance as we age or develop debilitating illnesses. How do we get that assistance? And right now, this is all in flux with the bills that are in Congress. So what I'm telling you tonight is what the law is and what is provided tonight. But if Mr. Biden gets what he wants through Congress, this may all change. And, depending on your views, that might be a great thing. You may not approve. But many of us are going to require assistance as we get older, or if we develop a debilitating illness. The best thing is to be rich. That's always good. Afford everything. Don't worry about it, and you're fine. Unfortunately, most of us are not in that situation. Many people think they've got it made because they're over 65, like I am, and I have Medicare. And thinking Medicare is going to cover me if I need to go into a nursing home or I need care at home. No, it won't. Medicare won't do that. Medicare will pay for short-term rehabilitation, and they mean short-term. If you're not making progress for, I think it's 4 consecutive days, you're out of that rehab facility. And it's not Medicare's problem. They also may help you pay for medications, but Medicare is not, it's certainly not free. And Medicare premiums are based on income, and they can be very expensive. Ramsey, my husband, just went on Medicare last spring, and he thought, I got it made. His premium is $400 a month for Medicare. So just because you have Medicare, don't assume you're covered. Medicaid, darn, Medicaid is a different program, and it's primarily designed to care for low-income individuals. And it actually does fund long-term care like nursing home care. Your income needs to be very low. And by very low, I mean like under $800 or $900 a month. And you can't have any significant assets. In general, Medicaid beds are scarce. When I worked at the hospital, we always had problems placing patients who had Medicaid because they just weren't available. The reimbursement to the facilities is not very good, and so the facilities don't want them. And those facilities that attract Medicaid patients are often not the best facilities. If you tell this, I'll have to hurt all of you, but we found that Ohio funds Medicaid beds at a much higher rate than South Carolina. So we started placing South Carolina patients in Ohio, far away from their families and friends, because it was the only place we had to put them. So this can vary from state to state, but in general, Medicaid is not what you want to be if you can help it. Another way to fund care is private long-term care insurance. And naturally, the younger you are when you purchase it, the more affordable. When you purchase long-term care insurance, when you really need it, you can't afford it. So any of you younger ought to be thinking about long-term care insurance. I purchased mine when I was in my 40s. It paid up for over 10 years, and now I have a policy that pays over $300 a day for home or out-of-home care. And you can't buy a policy like that anymore. But that's certainly something to check up on. The catchphrase now in geriatric psychiatry is aging in place, that people want to stay at home as an alternative long-term care facilities. But that can be very expensive, and coordinating caregivers can be a real task, particularly if you're disabled. If you're sick, who's going to manage those caregivers? Who's going to be sure there's somebody there on a Saturday night? It can be a real problem. But so these are issues that you need to think about and think, okay, if I get sick, what am I going to do? Ramsey and I went through a real discussion on this. We had decided that Bishop Gadsden was the place for us. But when the COVID virus hit, they had significant restrictions on themselves at Bishop Gadsden, I think for good reasons. But we had to think, is that what we want when we're old and disabled? Do we really want to have those kind of limitations? And I think that's a choice everybody's got to make. There's not a right or a wrong there. Sorry, I'll get this right. Why do we want to look at these issues? You're able to assure that your wishes are carried out after you're gone. What exactly do you want to happen? Your family and loved ones have the assurance that whatever decisions you make about medical care, services after death, and the division of assets would be your decisions and not those of others or the government. Because if you don't leave a will and instructions, the government's going to step in. That's the probate court's job. And you may have your own views on the government and you may want them to manage your life, but most of us prefer to make those decisions ourselves rather than have them made by the government. The other thing to think about is what it does to a family when you don't have your decisions. When they say, no, mama wanted me to have that diamond ring. She told me that. Don't you remember? And the other sister says, no, I don't remember that at all. And you can make schisms that last for the rest of their lives. And it's so easy to make it clear. Here's what I want to happen to my possessions, to my assets. Here's how I want them divided. But if you don't do that, you can ruin your life, your survivors' lives forever. They can have splits that'll never be cured. What about medical care near the end of life? There's some simple things we can do. Does somebody know where your insurance cards are? What are your current medications? Is there a list? I keep one on the computer and I print it out every time I go to a doctor. What are your allergies? That's important to know. Have you ever had any surgeries? Do you have any implants like an artificial lip, which I'm about to buy? Do you have someone that you trust that has access to your bank account? What if you can't pay for medicines, you're in a coma and there's no money? That's something to think about. Do you have a will? And does somebody know where it is? Soon our expert Liz will talk to you more about what a living will, a healthcare power of attorney, and a durable power of attorney is. But those are important things to think about. But I will defer to our expert. How about medical issues? If you've ever been admitted to a hospital, they ask you, okay, what do you want if something bad were to happen? How do you want to be? Do you want to be resuscitated? If you come in after a stroke or a heart attack and you are not aware and you have not designated a decision maker, most hospitals are going to make you a full code, it's called. And that means that all efforts will be taken to keep your body alive, even if that's not what you wanted, and even if it's fruitless. And Liz, you correct me if I'm overspeaking on the legal profession, but I think a lot less doctors and hospitals get sued for doing too little than for doing too much. So hospitals are going to go that extra step unless you tell them that's not what I want. I don't want to be on a ventilator. I don't want an artificial support for my heart.
Jim, I think one example of that is the Terry Schiavo. I don't know if y'all remember that.
Yes, I sure do.
I mean, yeah, doctors are going to uphold their oath to keep you alive. And that could mean being in a state of permanent unconsciousness for a very long period of time.
Yes.
So it's very important to have these documents. And the DNR, the do not resuscitate, is only done at the hospital by doctors. But I'll talk about the other documents that you can do outside of the hospital.
That'd be great. Thank you, Liz. And in South Carolina, medical decisions are made by the patient, but if the patient's incapacitated, say he'd had a stroke or weren't awake, there's a hierarchy. It's in the law. And Liz, correct me if I've misquoted this, but the first would be a guardian if a guardian's been appointed by the probate court. And Liz, it's going to tell you what a guardian is. Second would be the person designated in a power of attorney, if there is one. Third would be the spouse. And the fourth, which is where nightmares occur, is an adult child. And if there's several, the majority rule. And there's always one who doesn't agree. And that one is usually the one who's been kind of estranged from the patient. They've been the daughter or the son who visits Christmas, comes in Christmas Eve and leaves 2 days later. And they show up when mama's now sick and they want her kept alive for their own purposes. They want to make amends. It's not for mom. But you know, that's a nightmare you don't want to get into and you don't want your children in.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
All right, so backing up to that slide you were just there.
Yeah,
So if there's been a person designated to be the medical power of attorney or a spouse, that comes after what the probate court? Are
You're
these
right.
just 4 options? Or you're telling me that even if I've made a medical power of attorney and my spouse would be there to say, I know these are her wishes, that the first decision maker is the probate court appointed by a guardian?
if a guardian has been appointed.
Right,
Oh, you mean a
Marty?
guardian? Oh, gotcha. So
Yeah.
like I'm in.
Most of us won't have a
capacity.
guardian.
Okay,
A guardian is really only an incapacitated person
okay.
that the court has realized is incapacitated.
Right, Marty,
That-
that's not normal. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been practicing law for 20 years and I've done 2 guardianship/conservatorships.
Yeah.
So most of the time they're going to look to the living
Right.
will first. The living will
Yeah.
is a standalone document, then the healthcare power of attorney, and then the spouse who probably is the healthcare power of attorney and waving it around.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Thank you. That
I'm
was
actually
very
a guardian
alarming.
for someone, so it's important to me.
Yeah.
This we've talked about. The booklet you're going to receive before I go, you should know, is wonderful, and we'll make sure all of you get it before next week. But it provides a framework to make your wishes known before and after death. It asks some important questions, but these may be confidential. It's going to ask you for bank account numbers if you want to write those down. It's important for your heirs to know, where's my bank account? How do I get into it? What about credit cards? But if you have a credit card number and a password, that should only be seen by people that you really trust. So if you decide to complete this booklet, and I encourage you to do that, store it in a secure place where your loved ones have access to. I think this is so valuable that you will enjoy it. And that's what I had to say. Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you.
hello, everybody. I don't have a fancy slideshow, so I'm sorry. And I was in court all day with an unrepresented litigant, which gives me a little bit of a headache. And then I went to a soccer game, so I'm not even in a suit anymore. But I guess what I'll just say, I'll just start off with is, we're talking about end of life decisions, and I think it's really important that everybody of all different ages really thinks about this. I've had to get on, I'm 45, and I've had to get on a lot of my friends who have not done a will, and some of them are lawyers and they just haven't done a will. The other thing is, when you're a little younger, you may not need everything, but as you progress, you really should think about, what do I need now? So what I would suggest for everybody to think about is a will, even if you think I'm only a bunch of debt. It's really important, like Jim was saying, if you have children, to designate who you want to care for your children. Your spouse or the other parent will have priority, and there's nothing you can do to prevent that. But I always have a clause. So what happens if my spouse and I perish together, which has happened? And who do you want to raise your children? And it's a really hard conversation to have, quite frankly. It can get really interesting. I've had it with my husband, and you don't want to attack the other parents or other family, but you have to get real about who do you want to raise your children, and who has the same similar parenting style or belief system that you have. So that's very important. I come from a very large Irish family, and I have been designated as the personal representative of, I think, every aunt and uncle's estate. They said, you're young and you're the lawyer, so you get to do it. And I've already had to proceed with some of it. And it's hard to watch, cousins and family members, arguing over, excuse my language, crap. Yep. And it would have been a lot easier if people had just sat down and really designated, who gets what. I have a large blended family of 6 children, and I can tell you that mine is pretty detailed. Even though I don't have a ton of stuff, I do know that there are certain things I do want to go to certain children. So that is very important for everybody to have. And I recently have really been just reviewing wills of people. People come in and my daddy or my granddaddy did their will. And I'm looking at it going, well, this was done in, 85, but you don't need to change it. Or it was done in 85. And now let's talk about how you can tweak this. So just remember to kind of look at it, every few years and make sure it's still applicable. And I mean, a lawyer shouldn't charge you maybe at all, but shouldn't charge you much just to review it. So make sure you keep it up to date. The other documents that I recommend for everyone is either or both a living will. And the living will is going to cover certain circumstances. It's going to cover things like the Terry Schiavo situation where you're in a state of permanent unconsciousness. It's going to cover a situation where you are terminally ill. And then there's some other language in there as far as organ donation and that kind of thing. But those are really broad topics, but there's no document that we can create that covers everything. So the living will is a standalone document that you are to give to your physician, or if you go into the hospital, it really is something you should take with you. I am a terrible client. Every time I went in for a C-section, I forgot these documents, but at least make sure somebody knows where they are. And my dad, who's a lawyer, would laugh because I'd say, you know where they are, Dad. They're in the file that says important documents, literally important documents. So that's a good document to have if you know how you want to deal with those specific circumstances. And the reason it's good to have those documents is that you take the power out of anyone else's hands from having to make that really difficult decision. So it's something that I think is good, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. We're not getting rich off wills and living wills because I just think it's something everybody should have. But that's something that I think is a good document to have. The other document is a healthcare power of attorney. And a healthcare power of attorney gives the right to someone else to make decisions on your behalf. Some people just have a healthcare power of attorney. They believe that this person can make all those decisions, understands where they're at, and that's okay. If you believe that that person really is on the same page and you don't feel the need for a living will, that's fine. I have both, and the reason I have both is because my dad is my healthcare power of attorney, but I would like for him not to have to make those decisions unless it's absolutely not covered in the living will. On that topic, make sure you choose someone that can actually make these decisions. My mother is not my healthcare power of attorney, never would be, because there's not a moment in time where she would, remove me from anything. That's just not going to happen. So, just make sure you pick the right person. So those are some documents for when you're, that everyone should think about. A general power of attorney or a durable power of attorney is a financial document. It is giving to someone else. It's giving another living person. So it's a living person giving another living person the right to make financial decisions on your behalf. Some of y'all may have signed this. If you've ever done a real estate closing where you couldn't be present, that was a limited power of attorney. They were allowed to sign documents on your behalf just for the real estate transaction. When I do these documents, it's to handle all financial matters. So that means they can sell your house, they can get into your accounts. I mean, anything you can physically do, they can do. So, or financially do. So it's something that I have talked people out of, quite frankly, and said, you don't need this. You don't need to be given, your kid all this power. You're not sick, and your spouse is on your accounts, and why are we doing this? There are times, I just did one where my client has had some health issues, and her daughter is wonderful, and she doesn't have a spouse she can rely on. So we did one for her, and it was perfectly acceptable. I just make sure everybody understands you are giving that power completely to someone else. And that's a big deal. So the reason to have some of these documents, like the financial power of attorney, is to avoid probate court having to step in. And the 2 times that I've had to deal with conservatorships and guardianships is when there was just no family around to help. And so the probate court had to step in and appoint a conservator for all financial matters and a guardian for other decisions, like should this person be in a nursing home? Should they receive hospice care? I recently was appointed as a guardian because my client is terminally ill and unfortunately has a substance abuse problem, and his family is done with him. And so they've appointed me to make those decisions on his behalf. So I think you have to just consider that the conservatorship and guardianship is really in situations where you haven't, I hate to say haven't properly prepared, but that's kind of what it is. You've either failed to properly prepare or something has happened to incapacitate you to where you have to involve the courts. As a lawyer, I avoid the court as much as possible. I don't want people going into court. I don't want the government involved in these decisions. And that's why creating wills in these, whether it's a healthcare power of attorney or a general durable power of attorney are important if you believe that you are, unable to handle those things without court intervention. Let's see. Also, it's really critical, and I'm sorry if you hear a child. I have 3 of my 6 children in the house right now, and I just heard them come in. So I'm on here. Go. Sorry, guys. I'm at the beginning of my life on this stuff. So anyways, I do want to really make it critically, very important. And I've begged my aunts and uncles to do this, and I don't think they have. Please, 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 please. This booklet sounds amazing. Whatever you do, do not make a personal representative or executor, the person you appoint to probate your will, go on an Easter egg hunt for all your documents. It is excruciating. And what will happen inevitably is that person will miss something. And then we close out the estate and then we find it a year or 2 years later. And then we have to reopen the thing. It is just not fun. So, have every insurance policy, life insurance policy, every piece of real estate you own, all of your accounts, all your stocks, cars, tractors, anything with a title. I say tractors because we missed a tractor and it was a big deal. But it's all those little things that add up. If it has a title, or something associated with transferring ownership, please, please, please have it in one place. The other thing is if you can put payable on death provisions on your accounts, that will keep them out of probate. If you make certain all your beneficiaries on your life insurance policies are actually accurate, that is helpful. If you have been through a divorce and you have an old life insurance policy, don't leave your first husband or wife on your life insurance policy, because guess who's getting your life insurance? That first wife or husband. Just make sure that stocks, if you can put a beneficiary on it, put a beneficiary on it. Titles to vehicles, if you can put or instead of and. These are the things that you can do to prevent having to deal with probate, extensively. But if you're going to have to probate assets, please just let us know where they are and what they are, because it can feel, like I said, like an Easter egg hunt, and it's just not fun. I've made all my aunts and uncles promise they will not pass away at the same time, because that is my biggest fear, is that I'm going to have to shut down my law practice and find all their assets and debts. So I think those are kind of my basic.
I had a question for you.
Sure.
I've been involved as an expert in many cases to decide when a person is able to make a will, whether they have the cognitive ability. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have a process in our office that I have not strayed from since I began practicing law. So I always meet with a person by themselves, no spouse in the room, no child in the room, no neighbor. Even if they have to hitch a ride to my office, I try to stay in nice Southern way. Sometimes it probably doesn't come across that way, but I try to explain to people like this is about them making their directives and not about a child, telling me what the parent wants. That will never happen in my office.
Right.
And then I have a conversation with them. I mean, it's pretty not medical, but I can tell whether I believe I can tell whether or not somebody understands what they're doing if I can engage with them and have a conversation. I often will do small talk, and it's not really small talk. It's really like, do they understand
Right.
what's going on basically in the world and around them and with their lives? And there have been times where I've said, I can't do this, and that's a hard conversation to have. That's hard to say. I don't think that you really truly understand what's going on here today. But they have to have capacity within that time frame to sign the will. Some people have dementia or issues with memory, but can
Right.
still execute a will.
Exactly.
They just have to be cognitive, and knowing as to what they're doing within that period of time. So people sometimes say, well, they have a diagnosis of dementia. Well, there's a lot of people with a diagnosis of dementia, but it's whether or not they're cognitive and able to make those decisions at that moment in time. I also take copious notes because I'm a lawyer and there's a lot of CYA in my office, but
Yep.
that's kind of how we do things.
On a similar note, could you talk about powers of attorney? When can they be revoked if someone is cognitively impaired?
So power of attorney can be revoked at any time that somebody is still has capacity. So if you have the ability to create a power of attorney, then you have the ability to revoke a power of attorney. Living wills, you can just rip those up. Anytime they're ripped up, they're gone. But with powers of attorneys, general power of attorney, I should say, and anything financial, we have to actually file those, and we have to file revocations down at the Register of Deeds as well. So yes, you have to have capacity to revoke them.
Right. Yeah.
Liz, could you share a little bit when choosing either a guardian or an executor of your estate? Do those have to be family members? How should you think about that? And if you don't choose a family member, who are other options that people?
Sure. So I think we call them personal representatives or executors in South Carolina. So those are the people who are going to have to make certain that your will is carried out and make certain that it's probated properly. You can have family, you can have a third party, you can have an attorney. I do not do that except for family, of course, but I don't get paid to do that. I think that there are attorneys that will. It is a lot of work, and it is they do get a percentage of the estate for doing their for doing the work. Normally people will choose a family member, and that's because most of the time family is not going to take the percentage, quite frankly. They're just going to do the work. And most of the time that person you already trust to be in your home, for example, after you pass, or you trust that person. So most people put their spouse as their personal representative first, and then they look to usually adult children. I always ask people to pick someone who is close, hopefully in vicinity to where it's going to be probated. And also pick a child that's organized. Don't pick, and God bless my children, but don't pick the kid that's like completely ADHD and just has no idea what they're doing with documents and can't go to meetings on time. That is not the person you want. I mean, love them, but nope. So just pick somebody who's organized, who's diligent, who's kind of the mediator in your family if you can. And obviously somebody who's adult and willing to do it. I do tell people, please don't just put somebody's name down. Have a conversation, because I've had so many people recently coming into my office going, yep, I'm it, and I don't want to be it. And then we're having to search around for somebody else who might be willing to do it. And attorneys will help you. I mean, we help people probate to where literally they're just bringing me documents and signing stuff. but you still want somebody who's organized and who is going to go and get the documents for you and make meetings and all of that. So
Liz,
do
what's
not
the
have-
process?
I'm sorry. I was just saying, don't have two personal representatives. Don't do co-personal representatives. It's just not a good idea. Then you're having to have two people sign all the documents. I mean, just have one of your adult children. It is just simplifies it. I'm doing one right now, and one of the women is ill all the time. I went to her, I had to go to her house, which, I mean, normally attorneys don't do house calls, but I just said, I'm coming over, give me a window so I can get you to sign this stuff. And it's just not necessary.
Liz, what's the process if someone has been named a personal representative and they don't want to do it? They just say, I'm not going to do that. What goes on from there?
You can sign a document that basically just disallows, that you say you're disallowing it, you don't want to do it. It's an easy process. The problem is if someone doesn't have a substitute behind that person, then we're having to get the probate court to appoint a new personal representative. It's just another step that's unnecessary if you can avoid it.
Right. So it's important to have that number 2 in the will.
Definitely.
Yes.
Hey, Liz, I have
Excuse
a
me,
question.
I have a,
Claudia and I have prepared all of these documents in Georgia, and we've just recently moved to South Carolina within the past couple of years. Are all of these documents transferable to South Carolina?
Yeah, I would love your business, but nope, you're good. They all come with you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
No problem.
Liz, I have a question.
Sure. I don't know who's
If
talking.
if a person has a power of attorney, then they don't really need a living will or a healthcare power of attorney, do they?
They're different things. They're different animals. So if you have a general power of attorney, that person, that's for financial matters. Healthcare is specific to healthcare matters. So you really should consider a healthcare power of attorney. You don't have to have a living will, but the living will is just the document that comes first before they even look to the healthcare power of attorney. But it sounds like if you have a general power of attorney for financial matters, you definitely trust somebody. So you probably can just do a healthcare power of attorney.
The healthcare power of
Does-
Edna Monroe, the healthcare power of attorney, don't they come through your doctors?
They do not. The do not resuscitate order, those are issued by doctors, and Jim can speak to that. I don't do any of that because I'm not allowed. But no, the healthcare power of attorneys are drafted through attorneys or sometimes through other organizations. I mean, to be fair, there are other people who draft these. They're pretty standard documents. Living wills are the same thing. I've seen senior groups, kind of get together and do them. I did a seminar over at the James Island senior group, and but generally it's done by third parties.
Okay, I don't know why I felt like my doctor asked me those questions, but I would want to be on a respirator or whatever. And I thought I signed papers stating no.
You might have. I would just ask them to review those so you
Yeah.
make sure that they're what you need.
Yes, okay.
Generally, hospitals have different levels of care, resuscitation. A full code would mean you want everything. You want to be on a ventilator, you want a heart assist, you want anything they can do, you want them to do it. And the bottom line would be you want comfort only.
Yes.
And there's a couple of stages in between, but they're going to ask you to specify that. And if you say, if you're not able to, they're going to ask your healthcare power of attorney
Yes.
to say, as an alternate decision maker.
Mhm.
But if they don't know who that is, they can't do it.
Mhm.
So it's important to have those papers available.
Okay.
One thing that I just would like to say in all this is that there's a lot of paperwork to be done ahead of time, and it's making sure that as you're going through things and signing things, that you're also making sure that they're accessible. And someone mentioned, I think it was Nancy, that they're not in a lockbox or somewhere. These are all things you want to make very accessible to individuals, so that if you were suddenly in a hospital or needing them, people can easily access them. And I would almost say it's better to have more documents than fewer, because it's just they're each for very specific decisions, whether that's medical decisions or financial decisions. The names that you are indicating on those are really important, and making sure that those individuals chosen know that that is what their role will be.
Okay.
Two things on that real quick. For those of you who lived through Hurricane Hugo, do not put your very important documents in banks and safety deposit boxes, and just leave town, because, banks are not, so secure that things don't get destroyed. And also, you just need those documents with you. I mean, it's really important if something were to happen to your health, unfortunately. Lots of people want to use safety deposit boxes, but they're not going to let you in a safety deposit box until you get appointed as a personal representative. And lots of times people are already buried in the ground and they wanted to be cremated. And those documents are in a safety deposit box. So just make sure that you take them with you if there's a natural disaster, or if you're going to, if you're doing anything major, you really should take them with you. And then you said something else, Courtney, I should have written it down. But anyways, that's really important to take it with you.
And that's funny you brought that up, because I just took mine out the safe deposit box.
Good job. Yeah, don't
Yeah.
leave it in there.
I have a question about people with children. So my kids went to go on a trip, and as they were leaving town, they stopped by their best friend's house and asked them that if anything happened to them, would the best friends take their baby? And I was driving them to the airport, and I thought, okay, this is good, I guess. But I know that I have co-grandparents that may not agree with that decision. And the kids don't have a will yet. They will, after this call, have a will for Christmas as a gift.
That's awesome.
But what would happen? How can I explain to them what will happen if they pass before their child and they have this word of mouth decision they've made with their best friends?
They're going to end up in family court. That's what's going to happen. Because in probate court, they're going to look at, okay, if there's a surviving parent, then that surviving parent will have custody. That's just the way the statute is. Once grandparents start arguing, you're in family court. And a family court is going to decide based on the best interest of the children where they get placed. So that's why it's critically important to go ahead and name it, who you want your children to go to. And I'm not exaggerating. It's a tough conversation to have with your spouse. And I did not realize how heated it would get with my husband and I, because, when you're talking about your brother versus your sister or whatever, it gets dicey, but it's a conversation you need to have.
And please know that sometimes at baptism, when we name godparents, people assume that those godparents that are named are the guardians. That is not a legal definition in any way. Godparents at baptism are to help the children be raised in a faith. That is in no way picking a guardian for a child by naming a godparent. Someone also mentioned in the booklet, Betsy mentioned that there's a reference to a springing power of attorney. Can you speak to when that is appropriate?
I think what they're referring is a power of attorney that only springs into life when you're incapacitated, I think. I don't use the term springing power of attorney. And we generally, we have done those. We don't generally do those. We generally either do a durable power of attorney that is, just starts from that day forward. But there is a way to do a power of attorney. I've done it on occasion where if you're determined incapacitated by a doctor, then it would spring into life. So I guess that's what they're referring to there.
It's me, it's my question. Wouldn't a durable power of attorney cover all the bases then, though? I mean, so you're really better off not having.
A durable power of attorney is going to be for whether you're incapacitated or you have capacity. I mean, even if you're out of town, you could say, you know, go sign these documents for me. So that's the difference.
I'm not clear about power of attorney quite yet, so I have another question. So I have a power of attorney. Now, would that person be able to take the role of the healthcare power of attorney?
Do a separate document for the healthcare power of attorney, then yes, you just
Okay.
would need to name that
So I
same
need
person.
to, so my power of attorney, is that a general durable power of attorney then?
If that's what you have, then that is going to deal with still financial matters.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And that brings me to
Question.
something real quick, Courtney, about healthcare power of attorneys and living wills and how critical it is to have these documents. When my father-in-law was passing away, everybody knew his wishes. Everybody knew he did not want to be on, you know, events and all of that. And he had a healthcare power of attorney living will. His wife actually was having a really tough time with it, and just couldn't cope really. And I get it. I mean, I'm not judging her. But you know, I did take her aside and we went over the living will and the healthcare power of attorney. And the healthcare power of attorney was not her, actually, interestingly enough. And so once we went over that, then she was so much more comfortable knowing that she was not doing anything, or she was doing everything in accordance to what her husband wanted. And so sometimes it's just a great document, you know, to have and to sit down and kind of take in that moment, because I don't think any of us can really understand that moment until you're going through it when your spouse is on all those, you know, vents and all that kind of stuff. So just throwing that out there. Sometimes it's just the document and just being able to review it with somebody is super helpful. Terry, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, you mentioned something about all my family lives out of town. There's no one here anymore. You mentioned it was a good idea to have somebody in town. Is that just for the power of attorney, the executor, or could you be a little more specific for that? Because now I'm thinking I got to find somebody in town, Jim, and it's going to be scary.
It's not critical. I mean, it's nice. I think that if you have somebody out in California that's your power of attorney, that's going to be problematic, you know, I mean, because they have to physically be present, show the power of attorney to sign anything. With an executor or a personal representative, I'm just using those interchangeably. You can have someone out of town. What a lot of my clients will do, because they know I just do a flat rate for probate, they give my card to the person who's the personal representative or the executor, even if they're out of town, and they just say, call Liz, and you know, her family has been doing this and she'll help you through it. So I have a lot of personal representatives out of town, and that's not a problem. It's more the power of attorney that you just need to realize they're going to have to be physically present a lot of times to deal with some of these matters. You know, but again, the living will is just a document that stands on its own, just like a last will. So that's a non-issue. It's really for the healthcare and the durable power of attorney.
Terry, I will just add to that. I was living 3 hours away from my parents when I was their executor, and I literally would travel back and forth to be in person at the banks or with the lawyers or with the financial advisors. And, you know, remember taxes, folks. I mean, you know, going to the DMV to turn in license plates. I mean, the amount of time that the executor truly has to put in as far as closing out chat your life. It does take time, and it's just being really aware of what you are asking folks to do who may live further away. And as long as they are willing and able to do that, which is important, it's an important conversation to have. I do want to call on Judith, who would like to make a comment about DNR orders. Judith?
It's
Actually, it's
Walter.
me. James had mentioned that DNR orders are done within the hospital, and that is true. And there are various levels of resuscitation that can comprise part of those orders. There are two other sets of medical orders, though, that are applicable near end of life. One is when the person is actually terminal but living at home, or has a major illness where death is not unexpected, but they're at home. The physician can then sign an EMS DNR order. It's signed by both the physician and the patient. And if that's presented in the setting of a heart arrest that has happened at home and EMS has been called, EMS will transport. They will not attempt to resuscitate that person. The other type of document that Robert actually mentioned earlier in the chat is something called POST, physician orders for scope of treatment. This is a currently legal in South Carolina by statute. It took a number of years for that to happen. POST applies to any person within a year's life expectancy. So such a person would be developing dementia, and severe dementia, or have a severe illness that during that life interval, this 1 year where they could possibly die, but not be unexpected for them to die, then they're eligible for this document. The document is broken into parts. The first says, do you want resuscitation attempted? Yes or no. The second deals with the levels of care similar to what James had mentioned for in-hospital care. The first level is comfort care only, that if EMS is called to transport me, I only want to go either to a hospice or to be cared for to manage pain or symptoms. But do not intubate me, do not put me in an ICU. The second level of care says, yeah, comfort measures, but do not put me in that ICU if at all possible. The fourth is, and they would take non-invasive respiratory support in that second level of care. And the fourth is or the third level of care is full treatment. That if you checked, yes, I want to be resuscitated, well, there's that full treatment option. And let me say that's a resuscitation attempt. It's not a guarantee. It addresses antibiotics and the use of antibiotics. It addresses also the use of feeding tubes. These it's a document that is taken between the patient or the representative for that patient and their personal physician, or together with a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant in that practice. But it's signed by the physician and the patient, or if the patient lacks capacity at that point, their personal representative, and is subject annually to review or with any change in healthcare status.
That's for when they're still at home. Is that accurate? Because this is a first
Yes.
for me on POST. Okay. Good
Yes.
to know.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Walter, for that. And I want to be mindful of our time because this conversation is one that is not simple one and done, but something that we need to all continue to have with one another. I really want to thank Jim and Liz for being here this night, for all of you being a part of this conversation and for beginning to think about this. We have resources for you here in the congregation, and I'm going to be putting together a checklist and some more resources that we will also be getting to all of you. We are happy to be in conversation with you outside of this particular conversation. However, we can support each of you one-on-one, but this is, I hope, begins a fruitful conversation for yourself and for your family. Jim, thank you for being here this night, and we will
pleasure.
obviously be back together tomorrow, next Monday. Liz, thank you for being here tonight as well. And Liz has put her email in the chat, but I will also be sure to include that in material that goes out to all of you. Again, as a child, please know how much what you all are doing and how much you are thinking about this will be a gift to those who remain here. And I hope, Jim, do you have any closing comments, or Liz?
No, I'm always available if you have questions. And of course, as Walter points out, we have lots of medical advice within the congregation.
Yes.
Exactly. And so next week we will have a representative from Stir Funeral Home, and I will also talk about funeral planning. But I now invite everyone as we join together in closing and say together the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
The Lord be with you.
And
And
also,
Also with you.
Let us pray. Our Father,
Lord,
Lord in heaven,
Heaven,
hallowed
hallowed
be thy
in
name.
thy name.
be
Thy
thy kingdom.
kingdom come, thy will be
will
done
be done
on
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 earth
earth as it is in heaven.
give
Give
us
us
this
this
day
day our daily
as
bread,
we bread.
forgive us
and
our
we
Give us our
forgive
trespasses as we
as we
forgive
forgive
those who
those who
trespass
trespass
against
against
us.
us.
And
And
lead
lead
us
us
not
not
into
into
temptation,
temptation, but
deliver us
deliver
from
us from
The
evil.
people,
Thine is the
the
kingdom,
kingdom,
and
power,
the power,
and
and
glory
the glory,
forever.
forever and ever.
Good night. I hope to see you all this time next Monday. And if for whatever reason you aren't able to join us, this will be recorded and you will be able to watch it at a time at your leisure. Thank you, everyone.
And I want
Thank
to
you.
apologize for my family and all that calling. I called Velma and asked her to make sure nobody else called. She called. Sorry about
And,
that.
uh,
Jim, thank you, Elizabeth.
It's all right. It's
Thank
all
you all.
right. We're just glad you're here.